All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining. Those of you who are in person, and then also those who are on Zoom right now. Thank you very much. And thank you for giving Protein Tech the opportunity to talk to you guys today about, industry positions and how to build an impactful resume when you're applying for positions in industry. So just to introduce myself, my name is Afrida Rahman-Enyart, and I am a scientific liaison and product manager at Proteintech. Before I begin the workshop for today, I just want to share a couple company slides to introduce Proteintech to you in case you haven't heard of us before. So Proteintech is a leading manufacturer of antibodies and immunoassays. We have a really expansive portfolio of antibodies that encompass many different research area and over 13,000 targets. We also offer immunoassays. So for example, like ELISA kits, IHC kits, and then we also have antibody labeling kits as well as magnetic cell separation kits. Within our Proteintech brand, we also have our humankind branded cytokines and growth factors. And all our proteins are expressed in human HEC293 cells so that you can be confident that they have native folding, post-translational modifications, and glycosylation that you would normally see in human proteins. We also have our nanobody-based reagents. That is our Chromotech brand. And nanobodies are essentially exactly what they sound like. They're really tiny antibodies. And because they're so small, they can get really close to your protein of interest. So they're really great for things like super resolution microscopy or clean immunoprecipitations and protein purifications. We also value that we are a company for scientists by scientists. So our award-winning products are self-manufactured, and we offer the largest in-house portfolio of antibodies for the human proteome. We also understand the importance of product validation. So whenever possible, we do use knockout knockdown models for validation of antibodies. As antibody experts, we also have in-depth knowledge of immunoassay applications, and we can offer outstanding technical support. So with that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, who I am, my background, how I ended up at Protein Tech, and then we'll kind of dive into, kind of some tips and tricks for writing your industry resume. So I did my bachelor's at Purdue University, where I focused on psychology and a minor in biology. I then went and did my PhD at Indiana University. And so my work during my PhD focused mainly on developmental neurobiology. So I was looking at kind of like axon formation and dendritic formation, things like that. And then I kind of wanted to switch gears a little bit and go from something that was highly, highly molecular to something that allowed me to look more at behavior. And so I went and did a postdoc in urology at Northwestern University. And there I was studying gut dysbiosis and microglial activation in mouse models of pelvic pain. Um, and then kind of my second year of doing my postdoc, I decided that I really needed to kind of go into something that would be more long term. So I really loved my postdoc, and honestly, I would have stayed at my postdoc forever if I could. I loved the lab I was working in, the research I was doing, but for me, it just wasn't feasible to continue doing it just because I was hoping to kind of, have a family, and so I wanted to make a little bit more money, and I also wanted to have more of a 9 to 5 type of job. And so I started applying for industry positions. And so I ended up getting a job at Protein Tech. So I started March of 2022. And so I joined in as a scientific liaison and product manager. And I know when I was in grad school and doing my postdoc, I didn't necessarily know what kind of jobs were really available for me as a PhD in industry. And so I just wanted to kind of give a brief overview of the things that kind of fall under a scientific liaison and product manager role in case you are unaware of like what these roles are. So my main job is kind of to travel and to do kind of technical talks and careers workshops. I also do a lot of webinars. So again, technical webinars, and I also invite external speakers to give talks for our company as well. And then I also do a lot of content creation, so things like writing blogs, email content, social media posts, things like that. attending conferences and, forming collaborations with scientists. And then I also work closely with R&D to launch new products. So all of the product managers in our company are responsible for certain product portfolios, and so it's our job to kind of make sure that these portfolios are growing. And so we work very closely with R&D as well as the sales and marketing teams. Okay, so with just that, I wanted to kind of go and get into the workshop for today. So I split the workshop into two different parts. So the first part is going to be focusing more on, what are the individual parts that go into your resume and how you can make each of these sections kind of stand out, and then discuss a little bit of some resume do's and don'ts. And then I also wanted to focus on how you can highlight some skills that you learn during your PhD and your postdoc that you might not necessarily think about putting on your resume. So some of those transferable skills. And then in the second part, I'll talk a little bit more about formatting. So how you can kind of keep your resume under 2 pages while still getting all the necessary information in there and making it look nice. And then we'll hopefully have a lot of time at the end for some Q&A. So when you're first thinking of creating your resume, there's a few things that you want to do before you actually begin. And the very first thing is you want to research. So you want to make sure that you know kind of what type of industry you are targeting and familiarize yourself with that industry. So what kind of positions are available? What types of jobs are you looking for in that industry? Um, and one thing that you want to make sure that you do is when you're looking into that industry, look up some of the nomenclature, some of the terminology that is used. And the main reason for this is because when you look at the job description, a lot of times they use a lot of, internal nomenclature that's really known just in that industry. And so it'll be helpful for you to kind of know what are the qualifications that they're really looking for in a applicant. Um, you also want to make sure that you kind of research the types of jobs that you think you might be interested in, looking at the job descriptions and making sure that they are really a good fit. And so, like I mentioned, when I was in academia, I didn't really know what types of jobs were available in industry. And so it's really important that you kind of at conferences or on LinkedIn, find people that have different kind of diverse jobs and kind of reach out to them and ask them, what is their day-to-day like? Most people are happy to talk about, their work, and just try to get a good feel of what types of positions are really available. The second thing you want to do before you kind of begin writing your resume is you want to make sure that you set some goals. So you want to know what your career objectives are and what specific jobs you are aiming for. It's okay to not necessarily know exactly what you want to do. That was definitely my case where I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave the lab or if I wanted to have, a lab position. So I kind of had two types of goals in my mind. So if I was going to work in the lab and if I was not going to work in the lab. But you just want to have some clear objectives. So for me, because I was doing this, I had very distinct resumes based off of what type of job I was applying for, because you're going to need to really tailor your resume for specific positions so that someone can really skim through your resume and understand that you're really interested in that type of job and you're not kind of just rambling on your resume for any type of job that will stick. So when you're making a resume for an industry position, there are a few things that you want to make sure that you include. And so this isn't necessarily every section that you will have, but these are the main sections that you want to make sure that you do include. So you'll have a section like your personal details and contact info, a professional summary, your work experience, education, skills, awards, and achievements. So I'll go through each of these sections and talk a little bit more of how you can highlight highlight these sections and kind of make yourself stand out. Of course, there are other sections in here that you might want to include, like your publications or poster presentations, things like that. And I'll address towards the end, how you can really incorporate these sections as well. So the first part of your resume is going to be your personal details and your contact information. So this is going to be kind of at the very, very top of your resume, um, ideally in the center, and it's going to include your full name, your address, your phone number, your email address, any personal website that you have that you might want to include, and I starred your LinkedIn. So in industry, LinkedIn is really important. It's kind of the main way that you make new connections, and most people in industry are going to be using LinkedIn. So it's really important to not only just have your LinkedIn profile linked on your resume, but also make sure that your LinkedIn profile is up to date and that you're active on it. So we do have a blog on how to create a LinkedIn profile for scientists if you are interested in kind of looking at, how you can really make a competitive LinkedIn profile. Your next section right after that is going to be your professional summary. And so I kind of think of the professional summary as your abstract, or if you're on kind of like a dating site, it's your kind of little snippet, your bio on who you are. So it should be just a little short summary about the key points that really make you a competitive candidate for the position. And during in your summary, you want to make sure that you highlight both your technical skills as well as your transferable skills. Um, I will say that, some early professionals, instead of doing a professional summary, they do something like a professional objective, where they say, what they are looking for. So, for example, like driven neuroscientist seeking a creative and fast-paced role within a growing biotech company. But as, someone who either is in grad school or has a PhD or is doing a postdoc, I think you have enough experience to really write a good professional summary because you gain a lot of technical and transferable skills during these experiences. So I do want to point out that the examples that I'm going to be showing you today are examples from my resume when I applied to Proteintech. So this is what I had on my resume. So as you can see, it's just a very short snippet giving a summary of, who I am. So the fact that, I'm a scientist with a broad range of technical skills, specializing in molecular neuroscience. So this kind of gives them the background that they need to know of, what type of research I had done. And of course, I'm going to later on have a skills section where I list everything out. So I didn't really list my technical skills here. Um, I talk about the fact, that I have the ability to work independently or as part of a team, strong communication skills, again, history of collaboration. So in the job description that Proteintech had, they made a big point about working in a group and doing collaborative projects. So I wanted to really emphasize this on my resume. Things like leadership skills. So basically, I looked through the job description and found the key words of what they are looking for in a candidate. And I made sure that I highlighted those in my professional summary. So it was the first thing that they saw. After the professional summary, you're going to have your work experience. So the sections that I'm talking about today, they don't necessarily all have to be in this order. This is just the order that I had it in. So you kind of have to figure out, what do you really want people to see first? So I went with work experience. So I do want to point out that, the work that you do in lab is also work experience. So you want to put it in this section. And so the way that you want to organize this section is you want to list your experience from your most recent job down to your oldest job. And the things that you want to include are your employer, what your title was, your employment dates, and your most important responsibilities. So it's really important not to expand to such a degree that it becomes exhaustive to read. So you really want to kind of keep it to like maybe 3 or 4 bullet points, just talking about what your main responsibilities were and key things that you want to highlight that you might have done at the job. Um, you want to make sure that when you're doing this section to split it into bullet points so that it is more digestible for the hiring committee and so that they can just kind of go through it and scan as they want to and kind of skim through certain parts. You also want to highlight key accomplishments that might relate to the job that you are applying for. So it doesn't necessarily all have to be, at this position, I did this, this, and this, as in like what your job responsibilities were. You can talk about something that you accomplished there. So, if you streamlined a protocol that you're really proud of, you can put that under your work experience. One thing that I actually didn't do that I wish I had done after kind of diving deep into, how to write a good industry resume, doing these workshops and stuff, including quantifiable results are really important. And so this was something that my resume was lacking when I applied. So you want to kind of talk about how, like numbers are very important. So how did you change something at your job? So for example, like did you increase or decrease something? So one of the examples is, successfully advocated for autoclaved glass bottles for the department and reduced plastic usage by 50%. Or, you could talk about the quantity of work. So I published 5 papers or I trained 8 undergrads. So making sure that you kind of have these numbers to back up what you're saying is really important. Another tip is to write in STAR format. So oftentimes when we think of STAR format, which stands for situation, task, action, and results, we think about when you're interviewing or when you're telling a story. So generally it's something that's used when you're talking. But you can also use it in the context of writing and writing your resume. So if your resume kind of reads like a story, it's more likely that someone's going to go through the entire thing and actually read everything you have written because it's a natural flow. So what I mean by kind of situation, task, action, and results is having your job description talk about, what where you were, what was your position, what did you do that you're proud of there, and what was the outcome. So I highlighted an example of this in yellow where I've split it up into 2 bullet points, but basically the idea is that, my situation is that I was a postdoc. My task was that I had a project where I was trying to identify the role of AOH in gut dysbiosis and microglial activation in mouse models of pelvic pain. And so then what were my actions? So my action was I established several collaborations to utilize 16S and single cell analysis. And the results were that I had a multidisciplinary approach. Having kind of looked at this now, I would have probably also added, any publications that I got out of it, any awards that I got out of it. But this is kind of how I had laid it out when I applied. The other thing that you want to make sure that you do is use action verbs. So the hiring committee oftentimes goes through hundreds of resumes and it gets really tedious for them to read all these resumes or to even skim these resumes. And it is much more interesting for them if they have action verbs to look at. It makes what you did sound more exciting. It makes it seem like you were, you were very active in the role. And so you want to use words like spearheaded, established, participated, things like that. I know it's really difficult to come up with action verbs just out of nowhere. So the IU School of Public Health does have a really good resource available where they have a PDF that allows you to kind of talk about your transferable skills in an exciting way. So it's just a bunch of action verbs that you can use based off what you're trying to say. So if you're trying to say you were a research machine or you worked efficiently, so this is just a small snippet of what they have. There are many more examples that are available. This is the link for it, but if you just Google resume action verbs, IU School of Public Health, the PDF will pop up. So this was a really good resource when I was working on my resume. Another section that you want to make sure that you include in your resume is going to be your education section. So for your education section, you want to start with your highest degree and put your expected date of graduation if you haven't graduated yet. And the things that you want to list are, what the institution was, the degree that you got, the date of your graduation, your major, and any honors or awards that you want to highlight here. So this section is pretty self-explanatory. You want to just keep it pretty simple. Just make sure that it's really easy to kind of see exactly what your degrees were in and the time period that you were there. So other than kind of your work experience, one of the most important sections is going to be your skills section. So this is really the kind of, a lot of people just kind of go to this section to see exactly what your background is and what type of technical and transferable skills you can bring in. So you want to make sure that you include all your relevant skills. So anything that you think might be important for the job that you are applying for. And like I mentioned, you want to make sure that you include both technical and soft skills. Um, One thing that I recommend is using the job description to make sure that you know exactly what type of skills to highlight. And wording them the way that they are worded in the job description. And so the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of larger companies, they use what is known as an applicant tracking system. And so basically, if a job description is saying, we want someone who is a really good team player, but in your resume, you write, I'm good at collaboration. Although those mean the same thing, because the job description says team player, the applicant tracking system might not recognize the word collaboration. So it's really important to kind of take a look at what the job description says and to utilize those same words in your resume and in your skills section. Um, the other thing that I recommend doing is grouping the skills together into distinct groups so that they can be more digestible and so that the hiring committee can kind of go through and skim and ignore certain sections if they want to. So for example, when I was applying for this position, I knew that Proteintech would be really interested in, what my immunoassay experience was. So I put that kind of very much at the top, but I didn't necessarily know if they cared about some of my experiences in behavioral assays or any of my data analyses, but I wanted to still keep them in there because I knew it was a position where I'd have to do a lot of scientific communication. And so I didn't know if they wanted someone who had a breadth of knowledge. And so that's why I kind of split it up into these types of sections. The other thing that I didn't personally do here is I didn't include my soft skills on my skills section. So as you can see, I just wrote technical skills. And the main reason that I did that was because in my summary at the very top, I included kind of the main soft skills that uh, I wanted to kind of highlight. And, because you only have 2 pages, you have to kind of make those decisions and figure out exactly what are the important things that you want the hiring committee to read. Kind of have to make those judgment calls. So that's why I personally kept it to technical skills, but I know there's a lot of resources out there that say that you should include both your technical and soft skills in your skills section. So when you're thinking about soft skills, I just wanted to highlight some soft skills that, as as students, as PhDs, as postdocs, that you really learn. So, for example, time management is a big one, right? So running multiple experiments, juggling the demands of a committee or your PI. Project management is a really good one. So, you're sitting there designing lots of experiments. You have to stick to timelines. You have to be adaptable. So you have to figure out, how you can work around things like lab shutdowns or if you have limited space or limited grant funding. So all of that kind of falls under project management. I think teamwork is a really big one in academia, just because, you collaborate a lot with just people in your own lab or for larger projects, or maybe even external collaborations that you have or any cross-site work that you're doing. So teamwork is a really good one as well. Um, Resourcefulness and dealing with hardship. So this is also a really big one. I'm sure all of us have gone months without data and we've had to troubleshoot our experiments quite a bit, or we've had to, work under really small budgets. And so this is a good skill to also include in your resume. Communication, I think, is a big one. There's a lot of opportunities to communicate as a scientist. So, things like thesis writing, paper writing, grant writing, poster presentations, lab presentations, going to conferences. These all enhance your communication skills. And another thing that to kind of highlight is for communication skills, if you have experience communicating your science or your research to people who don't necessarily have the same background, that's huge because a lot of times in, biotech positions, you probably have a very diverse group of people with very diverse backgrounds. And so it's really important to know how to communicate really technical or jargony things to someone who has maybe a business background or who has a marketing background. So if you have that experience or those skills, that might be really nice to highlight in your resume. Leadership is also a good one. So I'm sure all of us have mentored people before, mentored students or taught, or, when you're leading your own research project, I'm sure there's people who are working with you that you have to assign projects or jobs to. And so when you first kind of get into industry, you might not have a leadership position, but when you're applying for a job, they really like to know that you have leadership qualities because it's a lot easier to have someone who has leadership qualities already that you can then promote than to try and teach them leadership qualities later on if they don't already have that. So just because the position you're getting to might not necessarily be a leadership role, highlighting that skill on your resume is still important. The next section that you're going to have in your resume is going to be your awards and your achievements. This again is pretty self-explanatory. It'll be just a short section that'll include basically the name of the award and the issuing organization and the date that you received it. And if you would like, you can also include the amount. So if you got a really substantial award and you want to highlight that, you can include the amount of the award as well. So there are other sections that you can add into your resume that I did not talk about, but I will talk a little bit more about a couple of these. So of course there's other sections. So for example, your publications, your poster presentations, any professional talks you've done, any workshops that you might have attended, grants that you have gotten, or certificates and licenses that you might want to list. Um, the problem is that you can't include everything in your resume. So from this list, you kind of need to figure out what things are the most important to include And again, look kind of at the job description and figure out what of these sections will really help you kind of stand out and show that you're an ideal candidate for the position. So I'll talk a little bit more later on how to add things like your publication and your poster presentations into your resume. But before I do that, I just wanted to end part one with some industry resume don'ts. So I know I said this a few times, and I'm bolding this because it's so important. Don't write a resume that's over 2 pages. Again, this is mainly because of the applicant tracking system. If it gets a resume that's over 2 pages, it'll most likely be triaged before the hiring committee can even see it. So you just want to make sure that you keep that resume under 2 pages. Um, don't list all your technical lab skills in detail. So you saw that in the skills section, we had everything kind of in bullet point and just kind of as short as possible. Don't write in long paragraphs. So again, during your job description or during your research experience and your job experience, you want to make sure that you are keeping things in bullet points and just kind of talking about the very key aspects of your job. You don't want to list all your publications in detail, so I'll talk a little bit more about this in the coming slides. Don't list your references. So I know on, a CV, you oftentimes have, 3 references at the end. On your resume, you don't want to list those. When you're applying for a position, everyone knows that you have references. So if you are a competing candidate, they might reach out to you and then ask you who your references are for them to then contact. So I just wouldn't waste the valuable space on your resume listing your references. Don't submit the same resume for every application. Again, this is because of the applicant tracking system. You just want to make sure that the words you are using are identical, basically, to the words that are in the job description, so that your resume does not immediately get triaged. So for the second part, I'll talk about, how you can add some of those other sections to keep your resume under 2 pages and kind of the formatting tips on how to make your resume look nice. So in terms of margins, what's recommended is generally doing a standard 1-inch margin on all sides. If you need more space, you can get away with doing something like 0.75 inches, but no less than 0.5. And then the easiest format for reviewers to read is going to be if at the very top you center align your name and your contact information, and then you left align all the other text. I know there's a lot of, resume templates out there that have things kind of on the sidebar. And that's really your discretion whether or not you want to kind of use those templates. But just based off of what is the easiest for reviewers to read, this is the format. You want to make sure that you choose a professional and readable font. So again, that pesky applicant tracking system, it doesn't do certain fonts well. And so if it can't read it, it's not going to pass you through. So you generally want to avoid things like light or thin fonts. So it's recommended to use something like a sans serif font over a serif font because they have the clean lines that are easier for people to read, that are easier for the tracking system to read. I think it's Career Builder, or there's a lot of resources out there where if you just Google appropriate fonts for resumes, there'll be a list of kind of approved fonts that you can use. And of course, keeping it standard 10 to 12 point font. So in terms of how you can organize everything into 2 pages. So one of the nice ways of kind of having your resume easy to skim is having section headers that are bold. So for example, your work experience would be in bold and in a slightly larger text than the rest of the resume. So the section. Again, you want to make sure that you use bullet points wherever possible, and you want to make sure that your ideas are concise. So one of the issues that I had when I was working on my resume is I wanted to put everything because I came from a lab where um, our publications were really long because our intros were really long because we wanted to put everything. We wanted to talk about, exactly why we did some project. And so I had a tendency of just rambling a little bit on my resume. And so it's really important to kind of, after you write your resume, go back and figure out where you can shorten sentences. So where can you remove words? So do you have filler words in there? Or do you have two similar points that you can combine into one shorter sentence? And then, of course, I know I've mentioned this a few times, but making sure that you don't list too much when you're talking about your previous work experience. So just a couple examples of, how you can go about making your sentences more concise. So for example, shortening your sentences. So as I mentioned, a lot of times when we talk about our research, we really like to talk about everything we've did and like kind of the nitty gritty. So for example, I definitely have caught myself talking about my grad school work, saying something like performed immunohistochemistry and Western blot analysis to identify the expression of the growth factor neuroglin 3 in embryonic, adolescent, and adult rat brains. And in a paper, that might be really important, but in your resume, no one cares what ages you looked at, right? So something like performed immunoassays to identify developmental expression of neuroglin 3 in rat brain. So again, I also combined the fact that I just did immunoassays. So instead of listing them, because this is going to be in my skills section. Um, Combining two similar points. So for example, led project on the role of neuroglin 3 in neuronal polarity, formed collaborations for a multidisciplinary approach to studying the role of neuroglin 3 in neuronal polarity. So of course, those are two sentences that say very, very similar things. So you can combine them and make it a shorter sentence by saying something like led multidisciplinary project with collaborators on the role of neuroglin 3 in neuronal polarity. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about, how you can add some of those other sections that I was talking about. So of course you can't include everything in your resume. You have to keep it under the 2 pages. But we want to make sure that we get credit for all our hard work, all our publications, our posters, things like that. So the way that you can do this is by just having a list of selected publications or poster presentations. So for example, the way that I did it was I selected 3 publications and then I just listed how many I had, because they can easily just go and check on Google Scholar and figure out what the other publications are, or they can reach out and say, hey, can you send us an entire list of your publications? I did the same thing with the poster presentations and professional talks. If I knew that my position was going to be so focused on doing talks, I would have probably listed them here. But at that time, I wasn't aware. It wasn't in the job description. It was something they added on later. So it wasn't really supposed to be a position where I was going to be doing a lot of talks. And so I just kind of had a list right here, just saying that, or just a sentence saying, how many I had done. And just make sure you just have that list ready in case they reach out and they want to know exactly what poster presentations or what talks you've done. And then wherever possible, you just want to make sure that you list, keep it short, concise, wherever you can. So if you're interested in kind of transitioning into industry, where can you start? So the best place is really kind of attending workshops like this one. So today you kind of heard, my thoughts and my experiences and what I've found on the internet and stuff like that that I'm now telling you guys. But it's really nice for you guys to go to multiple workshops so that you can get many different perspectives from different people in industry. So kind of continue doing what you guys are doing here. Um, and then just kind of practice writing a resume. So you can take your CV and just kind of cut it from there and just try to get it down to that 2-page mark. Um, and then, once you start looking for a position and you see that job description, thoroughly read through that job description and try to find aspects that you want to highlight about yourself as a candidate and put those in the CV, in the resume, sorry. And then you want to make sure that you proofread it, right? So it's it's really easy to kind of just go through and then also overlook some of the mistakes. So make sure that you have some external eyes that are looking at the resume as well. So ask a friend, or if you have a mentor who's willing to look at it, to just kind of take a look and make sure you don't have any spelling errors or anything like that. You also want to make sure that you update it regularly. This is something that I was really, really bad about. So very recently, I think it was a couple months ago, I was doing a talk on resume writing, and the person who was kind of running the event, she asked me like, "Can you send me your resume so that I can write an intro for you?" And I was like, you know what? Shoot, I haven't been updating my resume since I've joined Proteintech. And so it was kind of a really good wake up call for me that, this is something, a tip that I should also pass on, that you want to make sure that anytime something significant happens, you're updating your resume, because you don't want to go back and just look at it and be like, oh no, I don't know what all has happened. I don't remember when was this, and things like that. And then you also want to make sure that you seek help and feedback from people who are already in industry. So that's easier said than done. But a really great way is just by going on LinkedIn. So most people are really happy to help out. So if there's someone who has kind of a job that you're interested in, it's okay to reach out to them and ask them like if they're willing to talk about their day to day, if they're willing to take a look at your resume. The worst they could say is no, they don't have time. But most people are really nice and they'll want to help and talk to you about their positions. And then just to remember, that you learn more than your technical skills in the lab. So just make sure that you are highlighting your transferable skills wherever possible. And this is also really important for when you get into the interviewing process, making sure that, your transferable skills are kind of at the front, because the interview, they already know kind of what your technical skills are from your resume. So the interview really is going to be whether or not you fit into the culture and the environment of the company. And so you just want to make sure that, you're highlighting some of those transferable skills. So here are some other tips for transitioning from academia to industry. So I found this kind of useful when I made the decision to leave my postdoc and come into industry. The first one is understanding the differences. So I thought I understood this until I was in industry, and then I kind of was like, oh, okay. So in academia, it's very knowledge driven, right? So we have a project and we have a question that we really, really want to answer. And we kind of do whatever we need to do in order to answer that question. But industry is more goal driven. So there's numbers. You have to get 50 products out on the market, on the shelf by the end of the month. And so it's more of an immediate deadline. So a lot of times, in academia, I was focusing more on quality. And so sometimes, deadlines would get pushed, or, I would just want to focus more on something. But in industry, not that there isn't the quality, but it's very, very fast paced and it's very quantity driven. So that was something that took a little bit of getting used to when I joined industry. Um, I would also recommend starting now identifying what your transferable skills are, because I know I listed a few, but there might be other ones that you think that, that you recognize that you have that might be really good for you to put on your resume as well. If you don't already have a LinkedIn profile, get a LinkedIn profile and make sure that you tailor that LinkedIn profile to kind of the industry that you are focusing on. Prepare for behavioral interviews. So after you submit your resume, if you are a good candidate, they'll bring you in for several rounds of interviews. And a lot of those questions will be behavioral questions. So, for example, things like, tell me a time about when you had difficulty with a coworker. And so you want to make sure that you have some of these answers prepared. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Things like that. So just kind of get those types of answers prepared. Um, why are you leaving academia is going to definitely be one that you are asked. So just getting that practice in now will be beneficial. Building a professional network. So I know I mentioned this in the beginning, chatting with reps at conferences just to get a good idea of what jobs are really available and to also just expand your own network. Going to workshops is really great. And then also gaining any relevant experience if you can. So if you do see an internship opportunity, can you do, a part-time internship or a virtual internship, something like that? Or most companies will also do collaborations with external scientists as well. So, beta testing products or writing blogs, or, oftentimes companies have like webinar speakers. So, can you come and be an external speaker? Things like that. So, just reaching out to companies and figuring out how you can work with them might be helpful and might help you get your foot in the door of industry. And then lastly, I just kind of wanted to give you guys some more resources. So Proteintech is really interested in helping out early career researchers. So we do have an early career researcher hub on our website, where we have different career development resources. We have workshops that have previously been done. We talk about, any travel grants and mentorship awards that we'll be giving out. So definitely take a look at the ECR Hub if you want more information. And then we also have a blog page where we focus on technical as well as career development blogs. So we have things like I showed you the LinkedIn profile one. We have things like 8 tips for networking at conferences, time management and self-care in research, things like that. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for listening. My email is afrida@ptglab.com. So if after the Q&A session you do have any follow-up questions or anything like that, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. And then if you liked this workshop and want to know about our upcoming events, you can follow us on social media because we post about all our upcoming events on there. So with that, I will go ahead and start the Q&A. I think there's a question in the chat that we can start with. Would certificates and licenses fall under the skills section, or should we create a separate section for these? You can include it in your skills section. There's no need to have a separate section for it unless it's something that you think would be really, really important for the job and you kind of want to highlight it, highlight it more. That's the only time I would suggest putting it kind of in a separate section, but you can definitely add it to your skills. So there's another question saying, what strategies do you recommend for turning initial connections slash introductions made at conferences and talks into meaningful long-term professional relationships? That's a really good question. So my recommendation generally is to follow up. So I feel like oftentimes, we go to conferences, we talk to someone, we hand them a business card or something like that, and then it's crickets for a while until someone needs something, and then you might reach out. So it's really important after you meet the person after, the conference, make sure you send a follow-up email just talking about, how it was really nice to meet them. And then just make sure that you maintain contact with them a little bit. So if you are, have a LinkedIn connection with them or something, interacting with their posts. So just doing little things like that, because I feel like oftentimes that's really difficult with professional relationships where you kind of just lose touch. So you just want to make sure that you kind of maintain the connection. I don't know if there's any questions for those who are attending live.
If there are any questions, I think people can try to ask. And if Afrida can't hear you, I can repeat the question to her.
You mentioned the difference between a CV and a resume, and I'm guessing like the CV is more detailed, kind of everything you did. Was there ever a case where the company wanted to see your CV instead of a resume, or maybe they wanted both or something?
So if that's the case, yeah, so that's a good point. If that's the case, the job description will say CV slash resume, in which case you can absolutely submit a CV. So that will be if the company prefers a CV or if they're okay with either a CV or resume, they will list it on the job description. But if nothing is on the job description, just assume that it's resume.
Thank you.
I have a question. Maybe you can see me here. I wanted to ask the difference between a CV or what you would highlight differently between in a CV and in a cover letter, because I heard that cover letters are also pretty important for including when you're applying to jobs. Would you highlight something different compared to maybe things that you didn't include in your CV you would put in the cover letter?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So a lot of jobs are also going to ask for a cover letter as well. And a cover letter is going to be a really good opportunity for you to highlight things like, why you are interested in joining industry. So you can kind of think of questions that people would have about your resume. It's a good point. You don't want to, kind of reiterate what you say in your resume because they already have that. So it's just a good opportunity for you to highlight maybe why you would be a good candidate. So kind of talking about a very specific event or a specific thing that you did. And then kind of focusing on that, focusing on the very, very key things that you want them to take away from your resume. But I will say that if you're trying to apply for a position really quickly, like say you notice that, oh my gosh, this has been up for a few days and there's already like 100 applicants, you want to make sure that you just submit the resume and don't necessarily submit a cover letter unless it's required to have a cover letter. And the reason for this is because the cover letter is going to be the first thing that they see. So if you write a, poor cover letter, they're probably not going to look at your resume. So no cover letter is better than a bad cover letter. So that's generally the recommendation. But yeah, in terms of what you want to highlight, why you're interested in switching to industry, and then maybe a story about, something key that you did that you really, really want to highlight. There's another question saying, do you have thoughts, experiences, or insights on the effectiveness of having a personal website versus LinkedIn profile? Is both too much to add into a resume? I don't have personal experience, so I know a couple people that have personal websites, but I think that a LinkedIn is probably more beneficial just because it's a platform that allows you to kind of interact with other people. So if you were going to focus on one, I would focus more on the LinkedIn profile. I don't think it's too much to have both on your resume if you do have a personal website, because I know some people who have devoted a lot of energy and it's resources to having a very nice website where it lists a lot of their work, their publications, and then also includes like data images, which is something that you can't do on LinkedIn. So, for example, if you're applying for a job where, you're expected to be an IF scientist and you really want to highlight your IF data, this might be a good opportunity to have a personal website where you can kind of showcase that. So it's going to really be dependent on what type of job you're applying for. But if you need to kind of focus on one and choose one, I would recommend doing the LinkedIn profile. Are there any other questions?
Yes, if there aren't any other questions, then thank you so much, Afrida.
Yeah,
For running.
absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming as well.
Yeah, thanks. And then if anyone does have any questions, please do email me at afrida@ptglab.com or add me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect. Good. Thanks. All right, see ya.